Off a day, and welcome to this, wait for it, POTcast. I mean, you know, all the media thinking of all the marijuana, cannabis puns.
Right.
First of all, Senator Clynt Ridgell here, congratulations on the passage of this historic piece of legislation.
Thanks.
Public Law 35-5, which legalizes cannabis for responsible adult use.
Right.
And, hey, this is something that I was thinking last night, what else did this guy campaign on?
There's something I have a bone to pick with you, actually.
Okay.
So when I was on KUAM for one of the decision episodes, right?
Right. And
at the end, you guys have your after party, right?
Right.
So I went on and I remember talking about, I was like, make Guam green again. I was like, green with agriculture, green with, clean, green, renewable energy, green with environmental protection.
All you heard was green
with cannabis.
Like green,
and
right.
so at the end of in the after party, everyone was talking and you're like, what was the takeaway from, Clynt Ridgell? And then the cannabis. Yeah. And I was like, that's not the only thing, but I understand. It's obviously the one that stands out the most.
Yeah, and I mean, for good reason, I always felt like Guam was ahead of the curve out there in the streets, but behind the curve, when it comes to the government's treatment of cannabis. I mean, if you look at the medicinal marijuana that the people overwhelmingly pass, and then, to have it basically die a painful death mired in, red tape. And this, like I said, you campaign on this, and 4 months after swearing in, it's now public law. So first of all, let's just discuss, how did you feel when the governor called you over to Adelup? Did you know that she was going to sign it?
I didn't know. They didn't tell me.
Wow.
So when I was first called over to Adelup, I was kind of worried. I was wondering, is she going to sign it? Is she going to veto it? I was like, I even was asking. They're like, we can't say.
Right.
You've just been summoned.
But when we saw you guys walking out with the governor.
By that time, I knew already.
Right, yeah.
So when I was called into her office, it was just a half an hour before signing. Or 15 minutes, whatever it was.
Right.
And then that's when she said she was going to sign it. So by the time we were walking in, we already knew that she was going to sign it.
Now, we'd all talked to the governor, different media, and she was really good about not saying what she was going to do. I mean, like you, cannabis was one of the things that she campaigned on. I mean, that was a big part of a big plank in her campaign.
Definitely.
But when the media when your bill was making its way through the legislature, when the media asked her about it, she would say things like, I support it conceptually, or, there'd always be a little qualifier there. So we weren't sure. But then when I saw her walking out with the senators who voted yes, okay, then she's definitely going to sign it, because I didn't think she would call you guys at Adelup to watch her, veto the bill. So.
Right. Or if she did call us and she said she was going to veto it, I probably would have just excused myself and said,
"Okay, later."
Yeah, can I go now?
So there's a lot of questions that people have. I mean, I think people supported this conceptually too, and there was the community was really divided on it. I got to give you props, because I think you handled the naysayers very assertively on the session floor. I don't know how many times you would chime in and be like, "Oh, there's no study that shows that." And so, how much research did you do on this, and how long have you thought about doing this?
To be honest, that's a good question. Okay, because it goes back a long ways. Literally, when I was a kid in high school, my dad, and I had to do a paper on, I don't remember what the paper was, but there were certain parameters you have to write a paper on this, and that. So within the parameters, my dad said, why don't you do a paper on legalization? I said, what? What are you talking about? I was in high school, and I was going to a evangelical Christian academy, as a matter of fact.
Wow.
Private school. And so it made me think about it. And so I did a paper. My dad showed me, look this up, look that up, look here, look what they're doing in other countries where it's been decriminalized and all of that.
Yeah.
So I did a whole paper on it, and I got an A on it. And that started me thinking about, really, I think we're approaching this whole prohibition thing the wrong way. That's when I researched back then, learned about the prohibition on alcohol, how that failed. And it actually led to more binge drinking. It led to hard liquor actually came about because of alcohol. Because when you have to smuggle in alcohol, it makes more sense to shrink down the size of the alcohol into small hard liquor bottles with a high alcohol content than like kegs of beer that you got to sneak into a bar or something. Right. So that actually created really strong liquors. So in doing all that research, and then I just continued to research over the years, as I got older and read up on it. and see what other jurisdictions were starting to do. So it's something I always thought about doing, but for sure when I decided was when I started my campaign. When I started campaigning, I decided I'm going to make this one of my campaign platform.
And what was the response? Because, it was pretty ballsy to kind of campaign on this.
Yeah, on the campaign trail, it was pretty good. I mean, of course, I would get a few looks. A few people would kind of be like, I don't know.
He's a stoner.
Yeah, I didn't get anything like that, actually. Wow. In fact, the funny thing is the reception seemed to be better on the campaign trail than it was in just the last week or so leading up to the actual vote and the signage and the signing of the law. So throughout the campaign trail, like, no one pulled me aside and say, hey, I hate this idea. No one pulled me aside to say that.
Yeah.
No one pulled me aside and said, why are you running on this? This is horrible. This is dangerous. No one said that to me in the entire campaign trail. A lot of people came up to me and said, hey, I like what you're doing. Hey, I think this is a great idea.
Yeah.
So, I was a little surprised at how the opposition came out right at the very end.
And they kind of came out, I felt like their strategy was to come out outside of the normal public comment period. So you had the public hearings. There was a whole window where they could have provided written testimony.
Yeah.
But I felt like they didn't want to participate in that process because if they had come out later, then all of the focus would be on them. And it was a smart strategy because
that's what I think happened too.
They don't get blended in with all the people, the Howard Hemsings and whoever showed up for the
They just kind of came out the last minute, and so that's why. A lot of people were asking, they were trying to get me to go to this town hall meeting and everything. And I said, no, we're in session right now.
Yeah.
The town hall meeting is a little too late for this. We had a public hearing. That's what the public hearing was for. They could have come to the public hearing. And the town hall meeting, at the last minute, I was like, I just felt it was, they weren't going about it the right way.
And I felt like if the town hall had been organized by somebody who hadn't taken a clear stance on the bill and the issue, then maybe more senators would have been, tend to kind of be more open to supporting it or going.
It didn't seem like a real organic town. It just seemed like an opposition meeting.
Yeah.
Like, come to our opposition party so we can yell at you.
So,
and that's the other thing too. I didn't, I was like, submit your comments, we'll take them.
Right.
In fact, I said you can continue to submit written comments, and we did. We continued to accept all the written comments.
Yeah. Was there ever a point, the last week, it was a hot week before the bill passed. Did you ever think, and I know I talked to you a little bit during that week, that it wasn't going to make it?
Yeah, there was a point where I thought it was 50-50. There was a point where I thought, man, this is 50-50 right now. So I was like, it could go either way because, I'm counting up the votes. I'm talking to my colleagues, and there's some that are on the fence. And I was like, I don't know which way they're going to go. So it was definitely 50-50 pretty much up until right at the very end. I would say like the day of voting. That's when I felt confident was actually the day of voting. After talking to people, I started to feel more confident that we would get the 8 votes. So
if you say it was 50-50, who was the one of your colleagues that flipped over to your side?
Well, some of them were, I'll just put it this way. The 6 who were sponsors of the bill, that's myself included, were solid the whole way through.
Yeah.
So the 6 were going to vote yes on it. So it was 2, and I was trying to figure out which 2 would vote yes. So out of several of the other colleagues, there was a lot of them were saying maybe, and they weren't sure. And then eventually, the 2 that said yes were Luis Muñoz and Kelly Marsh Taituno.
Right.
Excuse me.
And how's it been after the passage of the bill? Is this something, because I felt like it was very, very heated. I was obviously, Senator Talina Nelson got very emotional, and so did Senator Amanda Shelton. But moving forward, are those senators who were on the losing side of this issue, are they able to kind of put that away and have you been? Are they giving you the cold shoulder? Or are you guys able to work together?
I think we'll be able to work together again. I mean, I hope so. I hope we can. We have to. We have to work together.
Yeah.
So I will say this: there is a. This is a little funny story. There is sort of a tradition, right? I've been covering legislature. There's a tradition for a senator's first bill when they pass their first bill. And usually it's a very non-controversial bill, so I can understand. But when they pass the first bill, they usually all turn around and they clap. Right. Oh, congratulations on your first bill. For me, there was like, Regine started clapping, a few other people started clapping, and then no one else was clapping. So Senator Regine goes, "Come on, guys, it's his first bill," and they're just sitting there. And I actually said, "No, it's okay.
Right.
No,
hold your applause.
Yeah,
please.
No, I didn't want to force people to clap for me, and they don't want to. I said it's okay, it's done." We did it. The bill's passed. That's all that mattered to me. I didn't need applause.
So before we get into the bill and the particulars of what people can and can't do, I got to ask you. This is one of the big things in your campaign. 4 months in, it's passed. What are you going to do for the rest of your term? I mean, do you have other tricks in your bag?
I don't know what tricks, but I have a lot of stuff I want to work. Like I said, agriculture is a big part of my platform, and I've been behind the scenes meeting with people, farmers and stuff. What I mean behind the scenes is in my office, but I'm not publicizing all these meetings and stuff. I'm talking to farmers, having them come to my office, and we talk about what can I do to help you guys out. So I have some ideas for that I'm still working on and trying to flesh out, but I have a few ideas on how to help farmers so that we can build up that industry. That's a big one. Of course, anything I can do to help with environmental protection. And that's just sort of, to me, is like a constant thing. That's not really it's not under my, what do you call it? Oversight.
Right,
under my oversight. That's actually Senator Sabina Perez's oversight. So she would be taking the lead on that, but I'm here to support in any way.
Yeah, I feel like this legislature is pretty strong on the environment.
Yeah,
right.
Yeah, absolutely. And so the environmental protections, but green energy is definitely something that I believe, have a positive effect on, because I have oversight of the Guam Power Authority.
Right.
So, in working with the Guam Power Authority, I want to get Guam to use as much renewable energy as possible. I mean, we've got the sunlight here beaming down on us. We're in the equatorial zone, just 13 degrees north of the equator. We get lots of direct sunlight here.
Right.
We should be making use of it.
Okay, so this is a podcast, so I feel like I got to reel you back in and talk about the pod, no right? It's not a green energy cast.
Sorry. Yeah. No.
So let's talk about just bullet point real quick. What does the passage of this bill into law allow people to do now?
Sure. Right now, it's legal to consume cannabis. You can consume cannabis in the privacy of your own home, especially, or private property where the property owner, like your friend's house or whatever, or a property owner that says you're allowed to consume it on the property, on the premise. You can't consume it in public. You have to
when
be 21. When
you say you can't consume it in public, do you mean anywhere in public, or just like public places like public parks? Yeah,
I believe the way it would be interpreted is pretty much anywhere in public. So like on the road, you're in the car.
Obvious.
Even if you're the passenger in the car, you can't.
Right.
And definitely you can't do it while driving. That's a DUI.
Yeah.
Under 21, you can't. You can't sell it to anyone. But you can grow your own plants, up to 6 plants, as long as it's in an enclosed, secure location that's out of public view.
Right. And so we talked about this a little bit last night.
Yeah.
I was under the impression, I think a lot of people were, that you could plant 6 plants in your backyard. For some reason, there was this thing circulating where people were like, as long as it's out of view of the public.
No, not the way it's written. The way it's written is it'll have to be. And why that is we actually wanted to model a lot of it after the Joaquin Casey Conception Act, Compassionate Use Act, right?
Which is the medicinal marijuana law.
We wanted to pattern it after that as much as possible. And in those regulations, it actually requires that it's in a secured, location away from public view, enclosed, secured, away from public view.
And so I guess what the questions we're going to ask is how do you define enclosed? Does that have to mean indoors, or could it mean a fenced structure outside? So
my understanding is that in looking at the law the way it's written, because it sort of refers back to the medicinal law, that it basically requires it to be indoors. Yeah, the way the interpretation would be. But I'm not an attorney to really interpret it. I don't want to interpret it, but my interpretation of it, what I believe it means is it would have to be indoors, basically inside a house.
Right. And so I think that surprises a lot of people, and I know that that's something that maybe, did you want to do something different with this, or was it a matter of compromising?
I mean, me personally, I wanted to treat cannabis as close as possible to the way we treat alcohol and tobacco. For example, the law has a lot of things about limits on how much cannabis you can store in your house, right? But there's no limits on alcohol or liquor. You can store it. You can have a huge liquor cabinet. You can have a wine cellar if you want, if you can afford one. You can store as much alcohol as you can store kegs and cases for the party next weekend.
Right.
You can't do that under the cannabis law. And that was just, like you said, it was some of the things I had to sort of compromise on. And so ideally, of course, I think, you should be allowed to grow it I think you should be allowed to grow it in your backyard, provided your backyard's secure secure and you don't allow people to come in and have access. And part of the concern is people are afraid kids are going to go rip off your plants or something. And so that's why we had to make sure it was in some sort of enclosed place, because people are concerned about the neighbor's kids coming over and stealing your plants and then getting access to it.
And I think that's going to surprise a lot of people, because I think that people who supported this, maybe they didn't even read the bill. Like, I didn't even know that you had to grow it basically indoors, but I think a lot of people are under the assumption that they can just plant 6 plants in the backyard as long as the neighbors can't see it.
No, not the case. It has to be enclosed.
I know we might be getting too far ahead of ourselves, but I'm going to ask you, is this something that you might want to further deregulate down the road? I know this is a big victory, and, the ink isn't really even dry.
It's barely dry.
Right? So is this something that down the road, maybe in the next term? Or?
I think people were checking the ink if it's like if it's disappearing ink or not.
So, is that something you would want to maybe look at?
Definitely, I'm open to looking at. I want to see first how we can accomplish this. Implement it. Let's implement this first. Let's gather all the data, because people are concerned, and I hear their concerns, and I want to make sure that their concerns are, heard, and that their concerns are allayed, and that they can see with real data after a few years of this goes by, and we come back with data and say, this is what actually is happening. This is how it's affected us. And then if that puts people at ease enough, then we can look at further deregulation. But we got to prove to people first that we can do it.
So who's going to be checking on all this stuff?
The government.
So, would that fall under GPD or public health?
Certain areas would be GPD. It depends on what area. Because certain areas for compliance would be GPD. Rev and tax would be something. The Cannabis Control Board would be something, right? Right. So Rev and tax, of course, with taxing and stuff. Cannabis Control Board with licensing, and so it would kind of be spread out.
I wonder. I'm curious. I think on the enforcement side, I just don't really see GPD really enforcing the grow it indoors thing. I think, if it's recreational and it's legal, I just don't see it. But we'll see.
Right. No, and it could be difficult to, and I admit that it would be difficult. So
it's going to be hard to enforce.
It's difficult now.
Yeah.
How does GPD know now if someone's got 20 plants in their house right now? I guarantee there are people that have 20 plants in their house prior to this law ever going into effect. I guarantee there's people that have had plants in their house growing. GPD has no clue. The only way they can tell is if someone complains and says, you know what? I think my neighbor's growing marijuana in his house, or whatever tips that they get. So to me, it's the same thing. It's just now people are allowed to do it, provided they have no more than 6. And so I think it would come down to that, where people can see, if the neighbor notices that I think my neighbor's got too many plants in his house.
He might have 7 in there, or 8.
I don't think they would carry 7. I mean, a neighbor probably wouldn't carry 7. But if the neighbor, the door opens and he just smells tons of weed smell and it's just strong, the neighbor can call the cops and complain and say, I think my neighbor over here has an entire grow operation and he's unlicensed. That's when the cops will come in and say, hey, you're unlicensed. I forget off the top of my head. There's different penalties depending on how much you have. It's, it's fines.
So it's scaled.
Yeah, scaled fines.
No jail time.
No jail time.
Right. So what's the limit? How much cannabis can I store in my house?
I believe it's an ounce of flour, and then it gets more complicated with the amounts for if it's going to be liquid or whatever. I have to look it up. I didn't have that memorized off the top of my head. And then
I wanted to also ask you, you're given a year for the Cannabis Control Board and the rules and regs and all that stuff. Is that really going to happen? Do you feel optimistic about that? Because Lord knows the only example that we've had is the medicinal marijuana.
Right, and it didn't go through. Right. I do, because here's the key to me is that the governor put her signature on it.
Right.
So that's her stamp of approval on it, right? So it's in her best interest to follow it through. And she said in the press conference yesterday, when asked, how soon are you going to put the board up? And she said, right away. She said, as soon as she can. I think even other media asked, do you have any names in mind? And she said, no names that she settled on, but she said, of course, there's names floating around in her head, but she hasn't decided on anything. So they're obviously thinking about it already. And I think the difference with this and the prior law, the medicinal law, is that that was a referendum, so which you would think would make it more powerful,
right?
But in the end, it wasn't the government's officials' law. None of the legislators. The governor didn't vote. It wasn't his law, so it almost like they weren't held to
Nobody
have to
really
do
wanted
it.
to touch it.
Yeah, no one was held to have to do it. It's not like this is your law, implement it, right? It was more like, so then it kind of lagged. And I don't know what else caused it to lag, but obviously it didn't get done. So I think with, governor actually affixing her signature to it shows to me that, okay, she's committed to following it through.
And what about on the business side, right? So have we covered all the angles for the personal use side? Mm-hmm. Businesses,
sure.
What's that going to take? I know you got to come up with the rules and regs.
That's pretty much what it's going to be. The Cannabis Control Board is comprised of 9 members. I don't know if I can remember all the members off the top of my head because it was changed in the
right.
And
so the governor picked so many, you guys picked so many.
So some of them,
right?
like there's like a public health member, Department of Agriculture member, I believe behavioral health member. I think GPD has to have a member on it, and then a few others. A total of 9. So the governor picks them, appoints the board. The board has a year to draft rules and regulations. Those rules and regulations are subject to the AAA process, which means they have to get sent to the legislature, and the legislature has 90 days to either act on it or not act on it. If we don't act on it in 90 days, it lapses. But we have 90 days to amend them, hold public hearings on it,
right.
Amend it, change it, whatever, reject it, approve it, or let it lapse. So once that's all done, then they can begin issuing licenses, and it's really going to be up to the board to figure out how they want to structure the licenses and how they're going to issue licenses. I don't want to get too deep into the weeds. Pardon the pun. So
hey, all right.
So yeah, because that's not really the legislature's job. I think we're supposed to craft more general policy, and then let the regulatory agencies sort of fine-tune regulations and things of that, or boards fine-tune the regulations and things like that.
And what about the lab? Is the lab a key component to actually getting businesses on? A
lab is still required in order for businesses to get licensed. They have to be tested by a lab. And so I've heard a lot of interest. I just got a message from someone today who said, hey, I've got a lab interested or whatever. And I said, that's great news, go pick up an application.
Right.
Everyone thinks I'm the guy to go to now. I'm like, okay.
And you're not. You don't have anything to do with the process.
Anything to do with the process after this. So, and that's not the legislature's role at all. It's strictly the executive branch. But, of course, I'll help them in any way if they have any questions. So that's why if anyone comes to me and says, hey, I've got this, I'm more than happy to help out and guide them and say, go here and do this or anything else they might need. If they need something legislatively, then that's something where I come in say, oh, if you could change this bill because of this. And if there's a good reason for it, then I'll consider it. But
what about, this is a question we thought of in the newsroom here. So you talked about being able to consume cannabis on private property. Mm-hmm. What if you have an owner of a business or property who says, bring your own weed, come on, you can come to my bar or whatever it may be, and you can bring your weed, you can smoke it here, I don't have a problem with it, you can maybe have a beer or, buy yourself a meal. Would that be okay if they're not selling it?
That is a very good question. I think
trademark Chris Barnett. That's a trademark Chris Barnett.
No, that's right. I think, but I don't want to. Don't quote me because I'm not an attorney to really interpret the law.
Right.
But my personal belief is, the way I've read it, I think you could do that, but I'm not sure. So it's best to check with an attorney, have them look at the law.
What about that whole forgiveness is better than permission?
But I do think it does kind of it makes sense to me because the law only says you can't sell it.
Yeah.
But if you're going to have an event and it's your private property and you say bring your own stuff and you can consume it on my private property, provided that you're not infringing on other private properties around you. That's the other thing, too, is because there's another thing that was added in there that has to do with the odor and noxious
So that made
fumes.
it in there, right. We kind of lost track. There were so many amendments, and I know the first few days on Twitter, everybody was just making jokes about amendment to the amendment to the amendment.
It was.
And so the noxious odor thing.
Yeah.
This was so funny to me. I didn't realize, but it's actually a thing in the States, too, I guess, right?
There's some states, I guess, where they've had people complain about too much odor, but I think I'm not sure. I think that's coming from huge grow operations,
right?
Where they're just not ventilating it properly.
And you're not talking about a guy smoking a joint.
I'm talking about probably huge warehouses, right? Yeah. And then the neighbors and the warehouses pop up in some neighborhood, and the neighbors next door just don't like smelling the smell of the cannabis, and they're complaining about it. So those are two different. And can that? I don't know. It's difficult for me because can that be considered noxious? I mean, you're just smelling the plant. You're not necessarily going to get high off of it or anything. I can understand smoke. If they're smoking out your entire neighborhood, of course you can say, hey, it's secondhand smoke, right? So yeah, there's some, but there's, I have colleagues that really wanted to see that in the measure. And so, it got in there.
Right. And so because I'm thinking 420, the timing on this is pretty classic. 420 is around the corner, and I'll be real, weed has been illegal, but you go around to a lot of these 420 events, and I mean, everybody, you go to reggae concerts, people have been smoking it, and I'm just wondering, like, if let's say a beach bar type place says, hey, bring it down, you guys can smoke, it's cool. So I guess we'll find out.
Yeah, and then again, it comes down to what's the definition of public place is going to be, and how well it's going to be enforced, and I mean, I don't know. I'm just because I can already see it now. Like, there's going to be some event, some people are going to be smoking, and everyone's going to blame me for it. You see, it's that evil senator. And you just said it too. People have been doing it at concerts already. It's kind of like they do it at concerts all the time.
My take was like, I'm a real progressive person, and I feel like to me, the debate on whether or not marijuana should be legalized, it was done in my mind. I mean, years and years ago.
Yeah, so, same here. Like I said, when I did that paper when I was in high school.
So what about edibles and all that kind of stuff? And then maybe also another question I had is, since it's what is it, level 1?
What was it?
Category 1? Schedule 1?
Schedule 1, yeah. It's been descheduled.
Right. Here. But so federally,
they're still on
we can't mail it in.
Yeah, so no, definitely that's a good point, because literally someone messaged me that yesterday or something at Facebook or tag or something. I'm trying to remember, but I get so many messages. Someone's like, "Can I order it online and ship it in?" And I was like, "No," because federally it's still Schedule 1, so you can't ship it. Can't transport it. Just like in the States, they're not allowed to transport it across state lines from a legal state into an illegal state. Now, there was some question about legal to legal state, but I'm not sure if that's been answered. Someone told me that you could go from a legal state to a legal state, but I don't know.
Maybe not test that out, right?
I wouldn't test it out. So
that being said, we're basically starting from zero. So if we can't import any edibles, that means that all the marijuana and all the edibles are going to have to be processed here.
Grown here. That's exactly why I wanted this bill. That's not the only reason, but that's a big reason why, when people were asking also, why now? Why not wait a couple more years to do it? That was a big reason. That, and to allow more access to patients who've been waiting to get it. Now, anyone who wants for medicinal purposes doesn't have to go through sort of this long process of getting because even for medicinal, you can grow at home, but you still got to get a permit, and you have to get your home approved of, like where you're going to grow. But under the law now, you can grow 6 plants and you don't need that. But if you want to grow 12 plants, that's the medicinal law, then you'd have to go get your permit and go through public health and all that other stuff. So the other big reason, besides the medicinal aspect, is to allow Guam to be able to develop an industry here. Because we won't be able to import. So it kind of forces us, okay, anything you want here, it's got to be homegrown, and you got to build this industry from the ground up, grow it from the ground up. Any products they want to make out of it, they won't be able to ship it in. They'll have to make it here on Guam. And I think that gives us the perfect opportunity, sort of incubates us from the rest of the outside world, so we can develop the industry here and grow it up. And then eventually, I believe the federal ban will be lifted eventually. And then once it's lifted, sure, they're going to start sending their products in, but we'll already have like a baseline of like local products. And then, of course, there'll be the pride in buying.
Where are you going to have Mama Tita's, Stoner Gooderia?
You'll
Chamorro
have
chip.
Exactly. You'll have some pride in the local product, right? And then the outside products will come in, will fill like a niche market. They'll be supplementing the baseline market.
Pacific Island, really mungy pots. Mungy pots. No, and I see what you did there. You're right. People talk about the money we can make off it. I mean, if we're starting from zero, then it just seems to me like the $5 million estimate, I always felt like that was a low estimate. For whatever reason. I think it's low, but I'm okay with that estimate because hopefully we can surpass that estimate. So that's what I'm looking forward to. I do think it's a low estimate, but I didn't want to come out and really challenge it because I don't know
exactly.
And I feel like your efforts are better concentrated on other fronts.
Yeah, exactly. I was focusing more on getting the bill through, not arguing how much money it's going to make when I don't know how much money it's going to make, because I don't have an accurate prediction of it, and I don't want to say I think it'll make this much and then I'm way off. So I'll go with what Rev and Tax said. They said $5 million. Technically, it's it's closer to like $7 million is what Rev and Tax said, I think. But
so let me ask you this: from seed to sale with this bill. The bill that you introduced versus the bill that was passed with all the amendments and stuff. Mm-hmm. Obviously, this is something you still stand behind.
Yes, yeah. Because I think it's still,
at its essence.
Yeah, and then it's also still a major step. I mean, I knew it needs to take a lot of amendments to get it through. So that's just part of the process. And at least we got it passed and got it signed. There's amendments in there that maybe we could change later. Yeah. But we got to wait first and see how the public reacts to this, how the public is able to get at ease with this first. Because, of course, it was a very contentious measure, and a lot of people came out in strong opposition. A lot of people are worried about it. So I was okay with letting some of the more restrictive amendments go through, because I know a lot of people are really concerned about it.
Right. And so are you in a position are you still wanting to address those concerns? I know a lot of the things when people were bringing this up, and this was still in the legislature's hands, the concerns that people had about, the kids and the access they're going to have. To me, that's white noise, because it's the same policy with alcohol. And, we kids can easily get alcohol.
Really easy.
Yeah, so.
Yeah, and then that's part of the thing. It really still comes down to me to, personal responsibility of parents. Parents need to talk to their kids and say, hey, yes, there's alcohol in the fridge. No, you can't touch it. Yes, I have liquor over here. No, you can't touch it. Yes, I have cannabis over here. Or don't even tell your kids where the cannabis is stored at, but, you can't touch it. If you find it, stay away from it, right? And educate your kids about why they need to stay away from it. And just educate them about it overall, and then let them make their own decision when they're 21 or when they're out of your house, because you can still make those rules like not in my house, right? Right. So obviously you can still keep those rules, just like it is with alcohol. There's parents who don't drink alcohol. They have adult kids that live with them, and not in my house. Like my parents, for example, don't drink alcohol, nothing. So when I was still living with them as an adult, able to drink alcohol, my parents were like, not in our house. So I didn't have any alcohol, I couldn't have it in the house. Now, if I left the house and I was 18, this is back when the drinking age was 18, folks. When I was 18, I could go to a buddy's house and drink alcohol, But even then, if I came home and I was a little too drunk, my parents would give me a hard time, because I'm still under their roof, right? So it really does come down to the parents, Yeah.
Have people approached you? Because I think that one of the things, unintended consequences of, this new law is now parents. I mean, this is a conversation I had with my kids years ago, but now a lot of parents are saying, oh, well, I have to have this conversation with the kids now about, yesterday marijuana was bad, today is legal. So, I mean, you got kids. What would your advice be to parents out there who have to have this conversation?
Yeah, just be honest with your kids. Tell your kids, what it is. Tell your kids what it does. Tell your kids how you feel about it. If you don't like it, you don't want your kids to ever use it their entire life, that's your right as a parent. To tell your kids, I don't even want you to use this when you're 40. That's your right as a parent on how you want to raise your kids. So take that responsibility, raise your kids, and talk to your kids. I mean, God forbid we talk to our kids, right? So
if they want to throw Senator Ridgell under the bus and be like, I hate marijuana, it's all his fault, it's all Lou, Right.
I mean, just talk to your kids about it. I talked to of course I had to talk to my kids about it. I'm the guy doing it. I had to explain to them. I had to explain to them what it is and what it's about and what's good about it and what's bad about it, and that they definitely should not touch it. Until they turn 21, they can make their own decision.
Right.
And hopefully I give them the right tools to make the right decisions.
So have we covered all the business aspects?
I mean, I can explain it further about the business. There will be a 15% excise tax. Maybe we'll talk about that. So there's a 15% excise tax on businesses that's when they sell it. Really, it's from the right now it's from the cultivation stage. So there's sort of 3 tiers. The cultivator, the grower, can sell it to the retail outlet, or can sell it to a manufacturer, I believe is what we called it.
Of edibles or whatever.
That's the one who's going to take the raw product and make edibles out, or make oils or tinctures or liquid form or whatever it is out of it. And then there's the retail side. So, but at the cultivation level, that's where the tax is assessed 15% excise tax. That's on top of the gross receipts tax. See, people are only talking about the excise tax. They're still paying gross receipts like every other business does.
Right.
They're getting an extra tax on top of it, an excise tax, a special tax of 15%. But that 15% won't be assessed on any medicinal sales. So that is something that the Cannabis Control Board will have to figure out exactly how to implement that part. That part may be a little bit complicated to implement. But I think we can do it. We just need to figure out how to do it. I know a lot of people are concerned. They say, oh, this is hard. GovGuam can't do anything. And I understand it is difficult. GovGuam does make a lot of mistakes. But I think we need to stop using those excuses of, oh, GovGuam always is, and just start doing things and just start saying, no, we can do it. And yes, let's just buckle down and let's figure it out and let's do it.
Have people been offering you weed since yesterday?
No, surprisingly not. Well, yesterday I went straight home. After I got off work, I just went straight home and spent time with my family. Nice. I didn't go anywhere. So, all right. But yeah, no one's offered me.
I mean, you're kind of like the weed Superman now, right? Is this something that you thought would happen when you decided to run for senator?
No, not necessarily. I mean, well, I guess when I put it on my platform, I realized that I might get labeled as that,
right?
But
and you were. I mean, people accused you of being stoned in the
public hearing. Yeah,
right.
One guy accused me of that in the public hearing,
right.
Which was completely false.
Yeah,
but I guess it goes with the territory. That wasn't my issue with him so much. That's the individual I actually had to have removed from the public.
Yeah.
The reason I had to have him removed is he just kept yelling. Calling me liar, and he wouldn't even let me talk. He was interrupting me when I was talking. He already spoke. It was my turn to speak, and I couldn't even get a word in, and he just flipped out and started yelling, calling me liar, saying I'm high and all that stuff. That's when I was like, please remove him.
Right.
It's not even, he doesn't want to have a civil conversation. So.
And what you were willing to do, you're willing to engage people civilly.
Yeah, exactly. Absolutely. As long as, keep it clean.
So is this conversation on whether or not legalizing marijuana is right or wrong, is that a dead conversation to you?
I don't think so. I think there's still people that think it's wrong, and I've seen some comments on Facebook. I know there's people that are opposed to it and they still think it was a bad decision. So I think now it's going to be from here on out is educating the public more about it and listening to their concerns. I do want people to know that I'm not here to brush people's concerns aside, because I'm a parent. I fully feel those concerns, and I weighed all those concerns heavily before I even went forward with this. I thought about what does this mean for my kids and their future. That's why I did all this research. And you mentioned earlier how much research I did, and I kind of laughed at it because my brain is full with so much. Like I stuffed this thing with. I've been researching for years, but leading up to this, I just stepped it up and I read almost everything I could get my hands on, articles, studies, pros and cons. I read all the con articles. I read so much stuff on it. My brain's overflowing with information on cannabis, and I almost want to not talk about it anymore. But I know that this is the role I've accepted, that I'm going to have to talk about. People are going to ask me about it, and I want to educate people and prove to people that this is a good thing.
When you talk about starting from the ground up, it's kind of going back to what you were saying. I mean, with all the weed that's grown here, we have an opportunity to name strains.
Yes,
like
exactly.
Guam Bomb, trademark Chris Barnett again. Trademark Chris Barnett. Marijuana's Islands.
Right, exactly. Yeah, I mean,
so that's another little industry that an unintended, maybe intended industry that people can make money off of.
Yes, they can make their own strain through hybriding, right? Growing in different strains and mixing and crossbreeding them. So there's so many opportunities. Definitely, that's what I was envisioning is sort of local strains being created that get branded that way. And then in addition to that, there's so many other spin-off businesses that can come from it. People joke all the Taco Bell and fast food's gonna have an increase.
Munchie's gonna boom. Visine gonna die.
Right, that kind of stuff. So I mean, maybe that's the case, or maybe just new businesses that are going to spring up around this to support the industry.
Right. Let me ask you a last question here. How are we going to ensure that the local people are able to participate in, these new industries? We had that requirement that a local person
that's still there.
Commandeer the lab, right? So how are we going to ensure that big businesses and big lobby groups from other areas where weed has been legalized don't just flood Guam?
Great
kind of the same way with the buildup. We have all these companies that came from all over the world to make money off of the island.
Yeah, great question. That's something that I've thought about a lot because I want our locals to have the head start, and so that's why currently the law does require that 3-year residency requirement. So basically, the way the law is now is 51% or majority of the company, the cannabis company, has to be owned by someone who's been a resident here for at least 3 years. So I think that was in the medicinal law. And so that's still in effect for this. Now, I did introduce a bill, but I actually sent it back to committee because in thinking about it further, the bill I introduced would have removed that restriction from the laboratory requirement, because in talking with people in the industry, they were sort of telling me, and other advocates were saying, that's what's killing the lab from coming out. That's one thing that's stifling the lab, because there's investors in the States who are like, I don't want to go invest in Guam and I'm going to be a minority shareholder, and forget it, you know?
Yeah.
So there was some recommendations to remove that. But that was more with the medicinal market, because it's a smaller market. So they're like, why would I be a minority shareholder? And then the locals didn't quite have the... So now I'm rethinking about it. So I've sent it back to committee. I'm going to talk to some more people and see, do I really need to remove this from 3 years to nothing? Or should I leave it 3 years? Is someone going to come out and actually, someone who's been here for 3 years, put the money out and be the 51% owner and get this lab up and bring in a partner to cover the rest of it in a larger market like this?
Right.
So I'm hoping that this larger market will give more incentive to someone to invest in that. And if they do, great, then I don't need that bill.
I know I said last question, but really last question. What about, the opponents of this, lawsuits, a possible measure introduced by one of your colleagues to repeal this law? Have you heard any of that's in the works?
I haven't heard the repeal one. Did you hear that?
No, I didn't.
Don't give them any ideas.
I just figured, the sales tax thing, right? So
no, so hopefully no one tries a repeal measure. As far as challenging it in court, I've heard that someone will challenge it in court. So I'm actually waiting to get more information on that and whether or not someone's actually going to challenge it in court.
Any names?
I heard one name. I heard Sedfried Linsongen. Yeah. I don't know if he actually did or not. I heard it, but I don't know if he did or not.
Well, okay.
And he did testify in the public hearing saying that he thought it was illegal and we couldn't go forward with because of the Organic Act, et cetera, et cetera. So he did testify that's how he felt.
Right.
So,
and there is that faction of those people like the Ron McNinches and the Howard Trapps who say that, you're a territory, you can't do this, you're handcuffed. And I think the governor's response to that at the press conference was, hey, if we're going to fight it in court, we'll fight it in court.
Yeah. And
see you in court, sucker.
And that's pretty much my take on it too, is that, it's their right to challenge it in court. Of course. That's part of the system. That's part of the process. Yeah. But, it's our right to make laws and pass laws. And then if they want to challenge the court, then let's see what happens in court. All
right. Well, Senator, thanks for your time. I thought it was high time that we sat down with you
hey,
to talk about this important issue. That's it? No more? I'm out of weed puns.
Jason just wants more puns.
Yeah, he's just like, keep being punny. So thanks, Senator, and thanks to our audience out there for watching and listening to this POTcast. A lot of great content on the KUAM Podcast Network, of course, and on the social media networks at KUAM. My name's Chris. For Senator Clynt Ridgell, Esta Hajos.